Carol, in a sort of related issue, you work on a human disease that is due to lack of telomerase. Can you tell us about this disease? And,
well, there are actually a series of human diseases. The first one that was apparent, that was identified by Inderjit Dokal, is called dyskeratosis congenita. But there is also idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, aplastic anemia, a collection of diseases. And they are inherited in an autosomal dominant fashion. And the interesting thing about the autosomal dominant inheritance is it means that people that have one mutated allele of telomerase have the disease. And so what we were able to do is to use a mouse model to show that when you have half the level of telomerase, telomeres aren't maintained. And so showing that the haploinsufficiency, having half of the level of telomerase, leads to this inherited human genetic disease. And so the telomeres get short, the cells die. In the case of aplastic anemia, that means bone marrow failure. So the bone marrow has to go through many rounds of cell division. When you can't do that, then you get bone marrow failure. So I think that this collection of sort of telomere shortening syndromes is really just the tip of the iceberg. I think we'll be hearing more about that because it suggests that actually normal human cells with short telomeres may also have a limited number of cell divisions.
what do you think the prospects are for telomerase gene therapy in these patients?
Well, there's two questions there. There's general gene therapy, but then there's some way, would correcting the telomeres correct the problem? Certainly, I think the fact that the individuals that have these inherited genetic diseases are heterozygous, which means they have one normal wild type allele, is a great advantage that you may not even have to have gene therapy in the sense of putting telomerase back, but perhaps small molecules that would only have to increase telomerase twofold to be able to solve this problem, since it's only a half the level of the enzyme problem. So I think that that's a great prospect for the future.
I don't want to move the discussion away from science, but I do want to talk a little bit, we're quite late in the program, I do want to talk a little bit about women in science, if you don't mind. So we've continued to have a problem with what is called the leaky pipeline. We all know that in our universities, about 50% of the incoming graduate students are female, and yet if you look at junior faculty, it's not 50%. Today, Howard Hughes announced its new set of young investigators. There are 50 new Howard Hughes investigators, one of which is here on campus. Congratulations, Sean Brady. But amongst the 50, there are only 9 women, a disappointing number. Any suggestions what we can do to fix the leaky pipeline? Liz, Carol, Vicki?
We just had a wonderful discussion with Rockefeller's graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, and clinicians, young clinicians, earlier on today about this. And so I think we could pick many different sorts of things. There are simple things, leadership courses for women contemplating taking careers who sometimes feel daunted by the sort of aspects of becoming an independent assistant professor. There are very simple things like that can be done, and I think campuses can really promote those at very little cost, I hasten to add, and these things I think will pay huge dividends. But then there's much more large sort of systematic issues, and I think that the unconscious biases that so often permeate through selection committees of all kinds, I think a lot of education in these aspects, many of which surprise well-meaning people who then realize that they themselves probably have enacted such unconscious biases. So education in this, again, can be very, very enlightening, and I think is slowly permeating through communities, but I'd like to see much more, and I think active programs on campuses can really be very helpful. And there are several examples around the country of such examples. And then we like to encourage, I think the idea that women scientists can definitely encourage other women scientists to do what we love doing, and point out something we fail to do a lot, which is that there's a huge amount of flexibility and autonomy in the way we do science in academic communities, and we never do a good job of pointing out to our young colleagues what tremendous freedom and flexibility we have in our jobs. Even though we have great pressure and demands, we do have great flexibility, and so one can live lives in ways that are compatible with having families and so forth. That's my...
Vicki?
Yeah, I think I'd mostly like to just reiterate one aspect of Liz's comments, which is that I think there are very few Larry Sumners in the scientific community. I think that by and large, both men and women view this as a problem. They agree on the fact that it's a problem. We don't really have an obvious solution, but I think keeping it as an active topic of conversation is probably one of the most inexpensive ways to address it. I mean, there are things like leadership courses for women, but just keeping it active is, I think, a really key issue.
So in my reading on women that have done exceptionally well in science, one thing that has struck me again and again is that in their early years, while they were growing up, they very often had very supportive fathers. For instance, Marie Curie's father came from Poland to Paris to take care of Marie's children while she was finishing her thesis work. And so I'm wondering whether you feel you've had supportive fathers or not. Maybe.
Yes. My father was a physicist, and I think the most important thing that he did was to explain to me how important it is to do something that you love and never shut any doors, and just that the academic ideal of being able to follow your interest was worth working for. He didn't ever come and take care of my children, but he gave me that as an ideal of something, of intellectual freedom and the importance of that.
Vicki, how about your dad?
Yes, so my father was also a scientist, and he played a very large role in my future career because we actually did science together. I decided I was going to be one of those science fair geeks in 7th and 8th grade, and he spent an endless number of weekends with me, and I have a feeling he probably got more fun out of it than I did. But I mean, we were really two science geeks together. In my family room, we were grinding up red and green poinsettia leaves. He'd bring home, so he worked in a pharmaceutical company, he'd bring home thin layer chromatography plates. I had a complete advantage over my other 7th grade colleagues, and I would run these little extracts of red poinsettia leaves and green poinsettia leaves, etc. But aside from the scientific aspects...
what did you find? Is there a result? They're red, they're green.
I have to go back and reread the paper. But my father also taught me how to use a sewing machine. So both my mother and my father knew how to sew. My mother didn't particularly like it. My father was quite good at it. He actually made all the drapes in our house. He made my mother several dresses. And he taught me not just how to use a sewing machine, he taught me how to repair a sewing machine. So there was a very, I mean, my father was kind of an eccentric and very interesting guy, but it was an environment where there were no roles, basically. I mean, there were in the sense that my mother was a stay-at-home mother, but the actual sort of the dinner table conversation, the atmosphere in the household, I think, I just didn't even know that there was a particular set role that I was supposed to follow. And so I think both of those had a big influence on me.
Liz, any anecdotes at the science fairs?
No science fairs. My parents were both family physicians, and my father was often very busy, but my mother particularly took a role in encouraging me in the sense that I really could do things that I was interested in. And it wasn't particularly science, but she would go out of her way if there was some art competition or something. She was out of her way not to push me into it, but to make sure I felt very supported doing whatever it was I was doing. And I think that was a very important sense for me to imbibe, and it gave me a kind of basis of confidence, even though the concentration wasn't on science per se. I think it was expected I should go into the old family biz, which was medicine, and it was a little bit of a black sheep to stray from that idea, which was fairly prominent in my family, that was what you did. But the other thing was that both parents being physicians, it was very clear to me that women also had equally interesting careers, and so that again was such a given that I imbibed, that I feel very lucky that I had that example in front of me.
I have to stop this. So I really am sorry to have to stop this discussion. I could listen for the next half hour or hour. But I do want to congratulate each and every one of you. And I want to thank Mary Robinson for making this a very special occasion, coming in a round-trip flight in less than 24 hours. Really do appreciate that effort. I also want to thank you all for coming and making this a very special evening. We've got a reception outside in the Abbey, so I invite you to stay with us at that reception for the next few minutes. Thanks very much.